There was no loud breakdown of Eric Clapton. He became stern, icy, reclusive, and uncompromising. Slowly, the warmth that had encircled him gave way to calm animosity and detachment. This was not the picture of a spiritual guitar elder or a soft-spoken blues purist. It was a picture of a man who had burnt through people and never turned around. One of the most important guitarists in rock history is Eric Clapton. However, many rock stars never forget the path of bitterness, broken relationships, and moral failings that lie behind the adulation. That contradiction, awe, and silent animosity would characterize each subsequent chapter. Eric Clapton never showed empathy, but he insisted on honesty. Clapton swept through bands like a silent judgment while others established brotherhoods. He moved away, interrupted others, and changed stories, frequently leaving those around him bewildered, hurt, or forgotten. He was considered principled by some. He was cruel to others on an emotional level. This is not an homage to the skill of Eric Clapton. It explores the reasons why so many rock musicians eventually rejected him. And those who helped build his career were the first to sense that distancing. It wasn't a quiet exit from the yards for Eric Clapton. He brushed them off. It wasn't simply the choice that was so startling about his departure. It was the manner in which it was presented. Clapton didn't present his departure as a shift in perspective or a turning point. He presented it as everyone else's moral failure. Clapton, who was dissatisfied with the band's move toward commercial success, left with a sense of assurance, portraying himself as the only defender of artistic integrity. By doing this, he portrayed his comrades as sellouts who had violated something precious rather than as collaborators who had taken a different route. For those who remained, the harm went beyond disillusionment. Not only did Nato Clapton leave a vacancy, he left a verdict. His departure was accompanied by condemnation, not dialogue, not explanation, and judgment. This was not a breakdown in teamwork under duress. It was an assertion of authority. It also brought up a troubling question that would accompany Clapton for decades for many rock fans who were paying careful attention. What did loyalty even mean in Eric Clapton's universe if he could so readily dismiss those who contributed to his career while asserting his moral superiority? That query followed him into his subsequent band and transformed cooperation into conflict. Cream was never an alliance. A pressure cooker was what it was. The death of my son was the main reason I had to find a solution, however it may also be the nice thing. I was unable to stop singing. First of all, I didn't really want it to be public. Tension became the band's unseen backbone as soon as Eric Clapton and Jack Bruce were compelled to work closely together. Both their musical chemistry and the animosity that drove it were indisputable. Each practice felt intense. There was an undercurrent of hostility in every session. Jack Bruce was a strong, vocal, and erratic person. He demanded participation, response, and discussion as he pushed ideas forward aggressively. In contrast, Eric Clapton gave a different response. He shut off, withdrawing. He refrained. He declined to confront Bruce directly. Something really unnerving was produced by the imbalance. Clapton started using his quiet as a weapon. Resolution was denied. The conflict of release was starved. As communication broke down, Bruce's erratic behavior filled the void, becoming louder, sharper, and more desperate. The friction turned into beauty on stage. The band had a fierce, menacing, and vibrant sound. Innovation was heard by the audience. There was more going on inside the band. Anger was solidifying. There was a decline in trust. The weight of silent disdain was destroying human relationships. The music didn't stop playing, so Cream didn't collapse. Living with that strain became intolerable, which is why it ended. A psychological stalemate that has no way out and no way to be fixed. There was no peace when that pressure eventually broke. It continued the battle. Ginger Baker and Eric Clapton's rivalry was never settled. It solidified. Their relationship was based on conflict from the start. Baker was erratic, combative, and overtly hostile. Clapton's response was one of disengagement rather than compromise. A chilly hush that made Baker even more enraged. There was tension in every rehearsal. Every performance seemed like a standoff that was about to blow out. The lack of release was what made the situation so uncomfortable. There were no disagreements that resulted in understanding or confrontations that cleared the air. Unspoken animosity simmered under the surface, contaminating everything in its path. Clapton declined to participate. Baker was not going to give up. Where there should have been communication between them, there was resentment. There was only tolerance, no attempts at mending, no apologies. Tour after tour, night after night, artists imprisoned within a band kept together by success and gradually shattered by disdain. Cream's eventual fall didn't feel like the end. It was an escape. Only wounds and the unanswered issue of how long that animosity had been allowed to fester uncontrolled remained. There was no closure or reconciliation. Furthermore, the harm extended beyond band dynamics. It quickly turned into something much more intimate. The rock world was taken aback by the unprofessional fracture. It was intimate. George Harrison was more than a co-worker. He was a confidant, a buddy, and he had unreservedly given Eric Clapton access to his house, his social group, and his trust. Clapton used obsession to repay that trust. He obsessively watched Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd, not in private or in silence, but with a ferocity that caused great discomfort to everyone around him. Songs, letters, confessions, and the dissolution of Borders came next. What started off as desire turned into a chase. The harm was irreparable when the relationship eventually went too far. It destroyed a friendship that was previously thought to be unbreakable in addition to shattering a marriage. Clapton won the woman. He was no longer trusted. And this moment altered everything for a lot of rockers who were outside watching. Clapton was no longer perceived as a wounded soul chasing love or a tragic romantic. He was perceived as someone who was prepared to betray loyalties, disregard repercussions, and sever personal ties in order to satiate his own emotional demands. Long after the dust settled, the disturbing question persisted. What did that say about everyone else in Eric Clapton's life if he could do this to someone as close as George Harrison? Instability dogged him everywhere he attempted to start again after that. Clapton did more than simply quit bands. He left them behind. After Cream failed, Blind Faith was supposed to be a supergroup, a statement, and a fresh start. It turned into a pressure chamber instead. Expectations were high. As the scrutiny increased, Clapton almost instantly pulled back. He rejected dedication, shied away from attention, and provided no consolation to those attempting to keep the initiative afloat. Lack of talent didn't cause the band to fall apart. It fell apart due to a lack of emotion. The dominoes had a darker path, Derek. The hold of addiction intensified. Obsession impairs judgment. Sessions of recording grew erratic, driven more by suffering than by intention. Clapton's bandmates watched him dig deeper into himself. More unpredictable, more inaccessible. They were forced to control anarchy that they did not cause. Ruined plans, unfulfilled commitments, and an emotional burden that wasn't really yours. Clapton performed what he always did when he could no longer contain the damage. He backs off. Just distance, no reckoning, no explanations. Once more. His peers were already noticing the pattern by that point, and it was impossible to ignore. As the years went by, adoration turned into unease, then into something heavier, quieter, and much more disturbing. Clapton's opinions were inflexible, unyielding, and he spoke without pause or consideration for the depth of his remarks. As other musicians saw, the man who was once praised for his emotional depth exhibited little interest in conversation, subtlety, or introspection. There was no success in challenging him. Discussions concluded before they started. Criticism elicited withdrawal rather than engagement. A pattern gradually became apparent. Because they agreed with Eric Clapton, rockers continued to communicate with him. They halted because it seemed useless and possibly harmful to approach him. Silence turned into a strategy for protecting oneself. The invitations waned. The distance increased. Those who had previously stood next to him decided to back off, not wanting to take the chance of getting sucked into a fight with a man who never moved, never gave an explanation, and never softened. Many were uneasy not only with Clapton's words but also with his subsequent refusal to take action. No building of bridges, no reflection, no reckoning. The rock community silently pondered the question. How can someone who has such a strong emotional connection become so unapproachable? And why did so many conclude that it was safer to leave than to say anything at all? Scandal did not erupt from the distance. It took root and continued to expand. A fresh question about Clapton himself, rather than about others, was eventually prompted by the quiet. Eric Clapton overcame his addiction. That tale has been recounted, reiterated, and sanctified. What followed is still far less comfortable. Clarity necessitated reckoning, and sobriety compelled clarity. However, for many people who came into contact with him, that reckoning never really came. There were very few apologies. Explanations were kept to a minimum. Clapton's story was used to selectively acknowledge pain, ignoring the stories of others he harmed. Instead, those who anticipated responsibility found themselves at a distance. There were never any conversations. No new wounds were opened. They were kept at bay. Silently, the onus of comprehension was placed on others. His victims were supposed to either forgive him or go away. This was the most agonizing chapter for a lot of rock stars. The chilly aftermath, not the pandemonium of addiction. The understanding that recovery did not ensure healing and that surviving did not always lead to empathy. Over time, the question weighed more and more on him. Did Eric Clapton ever really face the consequences of his actions? Everything he left behind is shadowed by that unsolved mystery.